the history of the OCA. The OCA, by the way, stands for what?
Orthodox.
No, let's have a catechumen do it.
Orthodox Church in America.
Very good. Do you think there might be a significance in that it's the Orthodox Church in America rather than of America? I've not heard anybody talk about that. It seems to me that there is a difference. We're just the Orthodox. Don't know how I'd explain it, but anyway. Yes, Jason?
Because it's fairly new in the 2,000 plus years of Orthodox history. Like there hasn't been large historical populations of Orthodox.
I would tend to see it more in terms of the fact, what it's saying is that we are the one universal Catholic Orthodox Church that has been in the world since the beginning in America. Rather than an American-produced Orthodoxy, this is the one Orthodoxy that you find everywhere, anywhere, that is in America, as opposed to being in Romania or Russia or Greece. That's how I take it. Now, so my sources for the history of Orthodoxy in America are primarily two. There are these short books. One is Orthodox Christians in America by John Erickson. He was the professor at St. Vladimir's Seminary. He was there when I was there. He was the professor of church history. After I left, some years after I left, he was ordained to the priesthood, and then in the last years he was the dean of St. Vladimir's, following upon Father Tom Hopko, who followed upon Father John Meindorf. Father John Meindorf was my mentor at Fordham University, but I took classes also from him at St. Vlad's. So that's one. It's called A Short History. And then there's this, Orthodox Christians in North America. There's no difference in the title, except for one word. This one is Orthodox Christians in America. It was published in 2008 by Oxford University Press. This is Orthodox Christians in North America, 1794 to 1994, published in 1995 by Mark Stoko, with help from Leonid Kishkovsky. Both of these were close personal friends of mine. Do I date myself? Anybody? Do I locate myself with that? Anybody?
I'm guessing that's
No, there's no guessing. If you don't catch it right away, Barb, you should have caught it.
Say it again.
They're close personal friends of mine.
That's great.
All right, dear, dear, explain it.
Did they already pass away?
And now I can't think of his name. Oh, Sid Hartman.
Yeah!
Yeah, Martin, where were you?
I was going to say that.
Well, where were you? Of all people, I should have expected you to get that.
Oh, he was only need to apply that. And he looks a little crazy, you gotta give him no offense.
So John Erickson, Mark Stoko, Leonid Kishkovsky, all close personal friends of mine. As I said, this was published in 1995 by the Orthodox Christian Publication Center. It was written in commemoration of the 200th anniversary of Orthodox Christians in America, 1794 to 1994. And then there's two other sources. I said these are my two primary sources, these two short ones. But then I have two other sources that I'm also using. This is a wonderful book, Orthodox America, 1794 to 1976. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not quite sure why 1976? Was that the canonization? No, it wasn't either.
Probably published in 1970.
No, it's giving the years. It's for the years. It's the period. 1794 to 1976.
What happened on 1976?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
The
What
bicentennial.
happened in 1776?
When did they get Orthodox?
Oh, yeah, the bicentennial.
200 years
Of the Orthodoxy?
No,
Well,
of the United
we
States.
got married.
Oh, is that what it was? Oh,
1776.
okay.
We got married.
Yes, dear.
That too. That's also a big deal.
This is a wonderful book. Lots of pictures, lots of primary documents. A wonderful book, a wealth of information. But as far as I know, these three are the only sources on the history of the Orthodox in America.
That is depressing.
And I could be wrong, but they're the only three that I know of.
I hope you are, sir.
But these are written with an eye to explaining the OCA, where the OCA comes from. Now there's a fourth book that is also very good. It's this one, Alaskan Missionary Spirituality, by the Archpriest Michael Alexa. He came to Alaska in 1970 at the invitation of the Alaskans themselves, the Alutiiq village of Old Harbor on Kodiak Island. And he has served as a priest in Alaska, I believe, ever since. At some point he was the chancellor in the Diocese of Alaska. He completed his degree, his doctoral degree at the Orthodox Theological Faculty in Prešov, Slovakia. My wife and I have been there. In Prešov. And this was, I don't know if this was his thesis, but this was the subject of his thesis. And this is a wonderful book, a very wonderful book. The history of Orthodoxy in Alaska. So these are my four sources that I'm drawing from in sharing with you a very thumbnail sketch of the history of the OCA. The history of Orthodoxy in North America, the history of the OCA.
Well, but what about the Greeks and the Antiochians?
Yes, we'll talk about them, but this is with an eye to the OCA, because that's who we are. As we're going through this history, we will, as Martin says, we will mention other jurisdictions, definitely. So I ask you to reflect as we're going through this history, what comes to mind, but whatever comes to your mind. But I think in particular reflect on what you see to be, how would you say, what is the history of Orthodoxy in America? How would you say? What is it witnessing to? What is it witnessing to? That's a wide open question, and it can go in all kinds of directions. But I'm going to leave it open like that. What is it witnessing to? And especially in your mind, as you hear the story, granted it's going to be very brief. I mean, this is a short history. These are two short histories. Well, this is going to be a shortening of these short histories. Even with the shortness of the survey, what do you see being borne witness to? Now, I'll also say, as we begin, that there's an overarching theme, let's say an overarching objective that is explicitly stated in just about every juncture in the history of the OCA, almost from the beginning. And that theme, that goal, that objective, quickly congeals into this Orthodox unity in North America. Orthodox unity. In other words, the OCA, what I mean to say by that, that the Orthodox Church in America was established, or was granted, or it came into being, if you will, in 1970, when it was granted autocephaly, as it's called, and we'll explain that, by Moscow, a Holy Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow in 1970. It came to be, it was established as the Orthodox Church in America, not just to be, another jurisdiction, but precisely to serve the objective of a unified Orthodox Church in America. One Orthodox Church encompassing all ethnic backgrounds in America. That is the purpose of the OCA. That's the goal and the objective. It was the hope of the OCA when it was granted this autocephaly, when it became a self-governing church in 1970. So the history of Orthodoxy in North America begins in Alaska. In 1793, by directive of the Empress Catherine to Metropolitan Gabriel of St. Petersburg, the Abbot Nazarius. Would it be helpful to write these names down just so sometimes you can see them in your mind better when you don't just hear them, but you also see them spelled? When the Metropolitan of Moscow, Gabriel, by directive of the Empress Catherine, gave to the Abbot Nazarius of Alam Monastery, which is way to the west of Russia, and I don't have a map of Russia. I should have brought a map of Russia too. He was instructed to recruit missionaries for a Russian colony in Alaska, for the Russian colony in Alaska. So on December 25th, 1793, a team of 8 missionary monks, monk missionaries, from 3 different monasteries. There was Valam Monastery, there was the Koniev Monastery near Valam, and there was the St. Alexander Nevsky Monastery. They left St. Petersburg for America in 1793, December 25th. Let's listen to the... I'm sorry?
Was Alaska part of America yet?
No.
Not yet.
It wasn't even a territory.
No, well, hang on. We're going to come to that.
It was a part of
You're taking my thunder away.
Oh, I'm
Be
sorry.
quiet.
It was a part of America.
No.
But it wasn't part of the United
No.
States.
Shush. You're taking my thunder away. Let me thunder for a minute. Okay, so this team consisted of Archimandrite Yosef. Archimandrite is like a herald. It's a top monk. It's a title. It's almost like an abbot for a monk. So this was Yosef, and then there was the priest monk Juvenali. This, by the way, is the Saint Juvenali, who was martyred. He was, when they finally got to Alaska, he was, his job was, his calling was he was sent into the interior to evangelize, because the natives on the interior, I don't know that they had encountered Orthodoxy yet. And he was slain by the natives. And I believe he had a companion with him. Now, my sources don't mention a companion, but I've heard elsewhere that there was a companion with him whose name we don't know. And so you'll hear Juvenali commemorated in our prayers as Saint Juvenali and his companion. The martyr Juvenali and his companion. There was the priest monk Makari. I'm sorry. There was the priest monk Athanasi. Let's just save some time here. Not Athanasi. Can you read that? There's not much point printing it out if you can't read it. Athanasi. And there was the deacon monk. Nektari. There was the deacon monk Stephen. And then there were 2 monks, Joseph and Herman. These 8 set out for America, as I said, on December 25th, 1793. They arrived the following year on September 24th, 1794. "293 days." Let's put this down. 293 days it took them to go 7,327 miles. So I did some math. They averaged 25 miles a day. From St. Petersburg, they had traveled across European Russia, all of Siberia, to the Kamchatka Peninsula. There in the Kamchatka Peninsula, they took to the sea, and they completed their journey, arriving in Kodiak on September 24th, 1794. They had traveled a third of the world's circumference and had never left Russia. So we come to our first questions. Why does the history of Orthodoxy in America begin in Alaska if Alaska was a Russian territory? And the second question is, why did the Russian Orthodox Church send missionaries to Alaska in the first place? So let me tease you a bit in an answer to the first question. Why does the history of Orthodoxy in America begin in Alaska if Alaska was a Russian territory? The answer is the teasing answer is, it begins in Alaska because it didn't take root in Florida. Ah.
Oh!
No, this is not a joke. It is not a joke.
Clever.
No, it's
I
not
see
clever.
you. I see you.
No, it's not clever. It's not a joke. It's historical fact. It did not take root in Florida. In 1763, okay, we're running out of space here. 1763. Okay, now I want you to pay attention to how this particular settlement in Florida begins compared to how the Orthodoxy in Alaska begins. So in 1763, the state of Florida, or the territory of Florida, passed from Spanish to British rule. The British Crown wanted, of course, to settle their new territory, so they enticed potential colonizers, with generous land grants. One British colonizer who took the bait, his name was Andrew Turnbull. He was a Scottish physician, and he had married the daughter of a wealthy Greek merchant. In 1766, Turnbull received a land grant in Florida near St. Augustine. So that would be the northeast corner of Florida, which he named New Smyrna in honor of the birthplace of his wife, which is in Greece, obviously. Turnbull recruited Greeks to come work on his plantation, but he did not follow through on his intention to recruit an Orthodox priest to minister to the spiritual needs of his colonists. His Greek workers, in particular. Sounds like the plantation, from the sources, it sounds like the plantation was poorly administered. Within 2 years, more than half of them were dead from disease, malnourishment, and brutal working conditions. Those who survived fled to nearby St. Augustine. The conditions there were so bad that the government closed the plantation down, so that by 1777, the first mass settlement of Orthodox Christians in America disappeared with scarcely a trace. Not even Barb Tkach had heard of this. Meanwhile, on the other side of North America, the Alaskan lands were about to be discovered by Russian explorers. Until the mid-1700s, this part of the world was unexplored. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Russian explorers and traders had pressed east across Siberia to the shores of the Pacific Ocean. In 1741, a fellow by the name of Vitus Bering, you're familiar with the term, the Bering Strait? It's in honor of this guy. first name was Vitus. He was a Dane. He was a Dane, so he's from Denmark, working for Russia. And here was another, and he was with another fellow, Alexis Chirikov. Russian. They sailed on the North Pacific and they mapped some of the Aleutian Islands. In the process, they sighted the Alaskan mainland and were able to chart the North American coastline. Not without misfortune, but we won't go into all the misfortunes that beset this expedition. They returned to Russia with sea otter pelts, which set off a fur rush of Russian entrepreneurs and trapper traders to Alaska. Many of these entrepreneurs, trapper traders, were bachelors, and they married native Alaskan women. Their children were called Creoles, in other words, those of mixed race. They brought the basics of the Russian Orthodox faith with them to their wives and children, and as laymen, they baptized their children because they had no priests. There was not even a church there. When the British Captain James Cook visited the Aleutian Islands in 1793, the Russians and the Alaskans were so assimilated culturally because of the intermarriage and looked so much alike physically that he could not distinguish between the Aleuts and the Russians. The team of 8 missionaries, therefore, in ministering to the Russians in Alaska, were simultaneously ministering to the natives who had been baptized into the Orthodox faith, but had learned only the basics, the bare basics. As I said earlier, it was in 1796 that the monk Juvenali, now I put his date, in the year 1796, the monk Juvenali was sent into the interior of the mainland to minister, to evangelize the natives, but he was killed by them on September 29th, which is my birthday. So I need to remember this.
Yeah.
He was killed on 9/29. So he's the martyr, as I said, he's the martyr Juvenali you hear commemorated in our prayers. And as I said, he had a companion with him, I'm pretty sure. And his name we don't know, so we commemorate these two men, these two martyrs, as Juvenali the Haro martyr and his companion. Even though this mission encountered many hardships, and I'm not going to go into them, it's a fascinating story. It occupies the first chapter of both of these books. It's a full chapter in this book, and it's a full chapter in this book. The mission encountered many hardships. It encountered, the missionaries were shocked and disgusted by the brutality with which the Russian owners of the Russian trade company treated the natives, and found it necessary to turn against their own countrymen in order to defend the rights and the humanity of the natives. Because of the personal witness, I would say, the sources indicate that it was more the personal decency and goodness of these missionaries, these monk missionaries, that made the ground fertile for teaching and winning over the natives and making them receptive to the Orthodox faith. And so the Orthodox faith, through these missionaries and through the way that they defended the natives and defended them against the brutality of how the Russians were treating them, has established deep roots in the native cultures of the Alaskans. Orthodox missions do not try to promote a political agenda or impose a particular culture. Orthodox missions are open to all cultures. Alexander Schmemann, Father Alexander Schmemann, observes in his Orthodox America, in his opening introduction where he says, to love is to remember, he says that the Russian missionaries' objective was not to make the Alaskans Russian Orthodox. It was to make the Orthodox faith Alaskan. Yeah, let me do that again, that's important, right? It was not to make the Alaskans into Russian Orthodox, but it was to make the Orthodox faith native or Alaskan. The Orthodox engagement of the Alaskan natives in these early decades of the mission to Alaska was in sharp contrast to how the American Protestant missionaries treated the Alaskans after Alaska was sold to the United States in 1867. Okay, have we answered our two questions now? Why are we starting in Alaska when Alaska was a Russian territory? Why are we starting the history of Orthodox America in Alaska when Alaska was an Alaskan territory? Well, that's because Alaska is now in the United States. It's America. And why did the Russian Orthodox Church send missionaries to Alaska in the first place? Because in order to minister to the Russians who were there. But in the process, they evangelized the natives. The Protestant missionaries, so Alaska was sold to the United States in the year 1867. So we passed over a whole lot of history from 1794, when the missionary team of 8 monks came to Alaska. We're now at we skipped up to 1867, so we've even skipped over the life of St Herman, which is the beautiful life, and we're going to be talking about it, this weekend when we commemorate St Herman, who died on December 13th. He died on December 13th, 1837. Many stories corroborated by multiple witnesses bear witness to the holiness of St. Herman, the striking signs that took place when he died. For example, the natives off of away from the island looked over to the Kodiak, the Spruce Island where St. Herman was, seeing a pillar of light going up to the heavens. And they knew that that was St. Herman. That's just one of the striking stories surrounding the death of St. Herman. So as I was saying, in contrast to the schools set up for the Alaskans by the Orthodox, which were multilingual, depending on the languages of the students, the Americans forced the Alaskan children to attend boarding schools, oftentimes removing the children from their parents by force if necessary. Moreover, instruction was in English only, so the schools were not multilingual. The American policy was explained by one of the ministers who headed the schools, the American schools. He was a Presbyterian minister by the name of Reverend S. Paul Young. He stated this. He described the policy that they followed like this. One strong stand, which, so far as I know, I was the first to take, was the determination to do no translating into any of the native dialects. I realized that the task of making an English-speaking race of these natives was much easier than the task of making a civilized and Christian language out of the native languages. We should let the old tongues with their superstitions and sin die. The sooner the better. And replace these languages with that of Christian civilization, in other words, Protestant civilization, and compel the natives in our schools to speak English and English only. As well, these American schools suppressed Orthodoxy. Students were encouraged to choose an American rather than a Russian religion. They were not allowed to have icons, venerate the icons. Orthodox priests were not allowed to administer the sacraments to them. And the only religious instruction allowed was according to Protestant principles. This was in sharp contrast to how the Russian Orthodox how they educated the children. They, as I said, they taught, their instruction was in whatever the dialect was of the students. And moreover, the great St. Innocent Veniaminov, who was a missionary to Alaska Territory before 1867. He was not the only one, but he's the most outstanding one, who learned, I don't know how many of the dialects of the native peoples, and then created an alphabet for those dialects, and a grammar, and translated liturgical services and prayers into those dialects. So you see the difference. I'm just wanting to point out the difference that the Alaskan mission, the Russian missionaries, as St Herman said, were not trying to enculturate the natives and make them Russians. They were trying to simply make Orthodoxy Alaskan. Alexa, the Archpriest Michael Alexa, describes how the American policy demoralized the native Alaskan children and produced generations of many children, Alaskan natives, who grew up believing that they were dumb Aleuts because they could not master the English language to learn the material. So Alexa pretty much pins the blame for much of the alcoholism that the Aleuts suffer to the demoralizing treatment they received at the hands of the schoolmasters in those American Protestant missionary schools. This practice of, yes, dear? Oh,
I
yes,
have a
Michael?
question. Maybe I missed it, but how did Alaska end up becoming part of the United States instead of Russia?
I don't know the full details, but it was sold to the United States in 1867. So it became an American territory, passed over from Russia to the United States. Why Russia sold it, I don't know. That's a detail I did not bother to nail down. But I'm sure there's a history there, a big story. What's that?
Seward.
Seward?
Yeah.
Oh, the Seward Purchase?
Secretary of State.
What's that?
He was the
Secretary of State, so it was under him.
Yeah,
I mean, America was looking to expand, right?
yeah.
And
As usual.
Russia was perhaps suffering some losses from the Alaskan colony. He thought this might be a good time to cut bait. I don't know. For sure. See,
Which is why maybe at the Seward Co-op, they could serve baked Alaska.
yes, I'm quite sure. I think that's historical fact. You could probably trace that historically. As I was saying, that's practice that the Russian missionaries followed in translating the Orthodox services and prayers into the native tongue was not an innovation at all. St. Innocent and those who helped him, they were simply following the precedent established for centuries, going at least as far back to Saint Cyril and Methodius, who were the missionaries to the Slavs and created the Cyrillic alphabet, the alphabet for the Slavs, and translated the services into Slavic. I think that's the beginning, at least, of the Slavonic liturgy, which ironically has become encapsulated in time, at a certain point in time, so that the Slavonic liturgy represents a Slavic tongue, a Russian tongue of, that's older than what Russians actually speak now. So that Slavs modern-day Slavs cannot necessarily understand the liturgy. That's their own Slavonic liturgy, because it's in an old Slavonic tongue. So there was Saint Cyril and Methodius, and there was Saint Stephen of Perm, who was a missionary to the natives in Siberia, and translated the pagan Syrians, translated or created an alphabet for their language and codified a grammar of their languages, and translated liturgical sources into those languages, into those languages as well. So the work of Saint Innocent we could say to Saint Innocent of Apostle to North America, or Enlightener of the Aleutians. He was simply carrying on a long-established tradition, or precedent of the Orthodox evangelical practice. This, as I alluded to earlier, this ministering to the natives, this serving the natives. Saint Innocent taught them carpentry. He taught them how to build furniture. He taught them better techniques for farming. But he was so successful in teaching them woodwork and carpentry that after they had built his house, they then built his cathedral in Sitka. So the Sitka Cathedral was built by the natives there under the direction of Saint Innocent. So it was this service, this self-giving service to the natives, and this kindness, the gentleness, the integrity, and the obvious holiness of the Russian missionaries, manifested in numerous ways. Missionaries such as St. Herman of Alaska, St. Innocent, Enlightener of the Aleutians, that drew the Alaskans to Orthodoxy. Really, this is the way of the Church from the beginning. I think we in America need to recover this understanding. I fear that we become so intellectual that we try to seduce Americans into Orthodoxy with the eloquence of our theology, the beauty, and it is beautiful. The theology is beautiful, but what makes the theology live is the life of the saint, who incarnates the theology. It's not just in the head. They incarnate and they begin to live it, and you can see it. You can see it. I think those of us who have the blessing of going to Holy Dormition Monastery every summer, we have a taste of how that personal incarnation of the gospel is so powerful. The Orthodox, going back to how the natives were treated by the Americans after the Alaskan territory was sold to the United States, they protested the treatment by the Americans. In fact, it got to the point so I was just reading a little bit ago that Bishop Nicholas, who was the bishop at the time in 1897, he actually traveled all the way to Washington, D.C. and had a personal meeting with President McKinley in order to protest the treatment of the natives by the Americans in Alaska. And as it turned out, as a witness, as a testimony to the work of the missionaries in Alaska already, going all the way back to 1794, the Aleuts that the American missionaries met, many of them, were already educated. They were already literate and already Christian. They were Orthodox Christian. They were not Protestant Christians, but they were Orthodox Christians. In fact, these Aleuts had been teaching other tribes to read and had sent missionaries to other regions for generations. This was the legacy of the Russian mission to Alaska. It was the flower that grew from all the suffering, the deaths, and the martyrdoms, which I have not touched on at all, that the early missionaries suffered in those early decades of the missionary work in Alaska. But the protests of the Alaskan bishop, Nicholas, I believe it was, fell on deaf ears, and even American newspapers at the time were maligning and misrepresenting the claims of the Bishop of Alaska, St. Nicholas, or not St. Nicholas, but Bishop Alaska, Bishop Nicholas. But again, Archpriest Alexa observes, ironically, The effect of this struggle in southeast Alaska, where all of this abuse was happening, actually helped the Orthodox. The Tlingit tribe, for example, the Tlingit, having resisted Christian missionaries for decades, they finally decided to accept baptism. But seeing how rigid the local American Presbyterians were towards native language and culture, the chiefs at Kilesnu, Juneau, and Huna invited the Orthodox clergy to christen and chrismate them. Now these are just names to me because I have not been to Alaska. Juneau, Huna, Kilesnu. They mean anything to you, Barb? You've been there.
You definitely remember the cities.
You remember the cities, yeah. So, to summarize this brief sketch, which overlooks many important details, let me just take the easy way out and read a snatch from Michael Alexa. Alaskan history, like all history, is written from a particular point of view. Seen from the perspective of the dominant Anglo-American culture, the Aleuts are an insignificant minority inhabiting a remote and inhospitable region. They retain characteristics of an alien and un-American culture, which uninformed visitors to the state think should have been abandoned long ago. The history of the Russian colonial period is simply stated. The Russians invaded Alaska, being, as everyone knows, inherently wicked and brutal people. I mean, Alexa is obviously giving the perspective of those who don't know what's going on there. In other words, the American perspective. Invaded Alaska, devastated the fur seal, the sea otter, and Aleut populations in a century-long massacre that ended only because the fur market profits fell abruptly or the fur seals were extinct. In other words, that's the line that you're going to get. The Aleuts, according to this version, were exploited, demoralized, enslaved, and decimated. Liberty and justice for all arrived in 1867. That's when it was sold to the Americans. After which the real history of the territory began with the gold rush, the rise of the salmon industry, the arrival of the military during World War II, and finally the battle for statehood and the construction of the oil pipeline. Aside from a chapter on the settlement of the native land claims, which was necessary before the pipeline could be built, the natives contributed virtually nothing. They were victims or spectators in the real history of Alaska. If a text discusses the Russian period in any greater detail, the focus is inevitably on Alexander Baranov and his supposed achievements. Baranov was the principal abuser of the natives. He was awful, the way that he treated them, forcing them, basically, enforcing slave labor of the Aleuts. And the Valam mission is almost never mentioned. The Valam mission, that's the mission of those 8 monks from the Valam monastery. And the contributions of Benyaminov, in other words, St. Innocent, received little or no coverage. Father Herman and Father Netsvetov, Major General Alexander Keshevarov, Captain Ilarion Akhmedritov, Simeon Lukin and his sons, whom I have not named in this short history of a short history, and the host of Aleut authors, teachers, missionaries, and explorers are ignored. The Aleuts have been omitted and forgotten. So if you want to read the real story, here you go. Alaskan Missionary Spirituality, edited by Michael Alexa. So here are some takeaways from the mission in Alaska, and also the brief description we gave of the effort to establish Orthodoxy in Florida. Let's start to compare and contrast. The character of Orthodox evangelization. Number one, is not to make people an ethnic Orthodox, but to make Orthodoxy native to them. This rings true to me and my wife. We fell in love with Orthodoxy when I was still at Nazarene Theological Seminary in Kansas City. It's my last year there, my last 2 years or so. And the reason that I went from Kansas City Seminary in the Nazarene Seminary in Kansas City to Fordham is because I was looking for Father John Meyendorff. I wanted to study Greek patristics. I wanted to study the Orthodox faith because I had already had a class on Augustine and the Cappadocians, St. Basil, of Caesarea, St. Gregory of Nyssa, St. Gregory of Nazianzus, all 4th century bishops. Augustine died in 431. He was the Bishop of Hippo in Africa. I was struck by what I thought was a radical difference in feeling, tone, and in vision between Augustine and the Cappadocians. Completely taken by the vision of the Cappadocians. It was alive. The vision of Augustine to me was just, well, it was not alive. And so I was looking for Father Meindorf because I wanted to study Greek Orthodox theology, the Greek Orthodox Church Fathers. And when we got to St. Vlad's, actually no, we got to New York, and I come into my first class under Father Meindorf. It's a seminar, graduate seminar. There are maybe 7 of us. That's the nice thing about graduate school. You just have small classes. Had not yet met Father Meindorf, so I was kind of shaking in my boots, you know, because he's a world-class scholar. I mean, he's at the top of the world, not just the country of the United States, but of the world. And so, what am I going to find? What is he going to be like? Is he going to be this grumpy, you know, academic who has little patience for stupid graduate students? Or what? Well, he walks in, and immediately, and his demeanor, and he was just so warm and joyful. He reminded me a lot of my grandpa Wesche. That's what he was like. He was like a dear old grandpa. And so, under the influence of Father Meindorf, and I have to say the influence of the students of St. Vlad's, because I took some classes at St. Vladimir's just up the road, about 15 minutes from Fordham, and met some of the students there. Some of them now are my brother priests, and just under their influence, I was completely taken in, completely. But of course, my wife did not have this experience she did not have these experiences that I was having over there across the GW, the George Washington Bridge. We lived in New Jersey, and the Fordham and St. Vlad's are on the other side. They're on the New York side. You had to go over the GW, the George Washington Bridge. But at that time, I believe, when we first started, that was only a quarter to get across, going both ways. I think it might be $6 now, both ways, maybe. So she did not have that experience. So I come home, I'm all excited about Orthodoxy. Boy, I'm ready to become Orthodox right now. There's one thing, actually 2 things holding me back. Number 1 is my wife. But number 2 is the fact that I just didn't feel right that I would have to become Greek or Russian to become Orthodox. Just did not feel right. I had friends at Orthodox. One was a Yugoslavian Orthodox, one was a Greek Orthodox. Greek Orthodox. So, but they were great guys. And it was they who told me about the OCA. And when I heard that there was an OCA, what do you mean, Orthodox Church in America? American Orthodoxy. Yeah, it's an American Orthodox Church. Boy, there was only now one obstacle. That was my wife. But she was willing to go wherever I would go, but I didn't want her to go unless she wanted to go. So anyway, to make a long story short, she read one book. It was a book by St. Silouan, the monk of Mount Ethel, known as by Archimedes Sophroni, the biography of St. Silouan. And she read that, and she looks at me and she says, I don't know how anyone could read this book and not want to become Orthodox. So dear, here we are in New York. Our families are clear across the country. If we're going to make the move, this is the time to do it. So we became Orthodox because there was an OCA, an Orthodox Church in America. So that's one takeaway, that the event that so this to me is the beauty of the OCA, is precisely its theoretical emphasis, on orthodoxy, as orthodoxy. I say theoretical because our first visit to an Orthodox parish, an OCA parish, in where was it, Saddlebrook, New Jersey, I think it was that Sunday, that was the first half of the service was all in Slavonic. This is after I've read Timothy Ware at the Orthodox Church. I've read Father Alexander Schmemann. I've read Father John Meindorf. I'm expecting to go in and to find this wonderful American experience. No, still in Slavonic. And that almost turned us away, but not quite. So in this regard, this is why the history of the OCA in Alaska is so important, because here we see the primary vision of the OCA. This is the vision of the OCA. It was incarnated in the missionaries of Russia to Alaska. This team of 8. This is how we envision evangelization to be like in America. But I don't know. Okay, then there's a second takeaway here. Why is it that the Orthodox are not afraid to make Orthodoxy whatever your ethnic group is? Why is it that we're not afraid to do that? In fact, why is it that we insist on doing that? And not to do that is a betrayal of Orthodoxy. Why is it? Well, you can find out a more full answer, be given a more full answer in Michael Alexa's introductory chapter, in which he describes how the Orthodox did not come to the natives and try to change their spirituality, because they found that the spirituality of the Alaskans was already very close to Orthodoxy. In other words, there was something natural about it. And that's the point, that Orthodoxy is not, in these terms, a religion. It's not a religion. Orthodoxy is simply the way it is, if you will. It's being. It's the way that we are. It is the articulation of the image and likeness of God in which we have been made. That's what Orthodoxy is. So in order to find Orthodoxy, we need to find ourselves. That's as simple as that. And if we find Orthodoxy, the true Orthodoxy, we find the image and likeness of God that we are. So there's no point in making you Russian or Greek or Romanian or Serbian. That's to take you away from Orthodoxy. We're Americans, although I'm from German ancestry, but I'm an American. And so I don't want to become, it doesn't feel right. I'm sure it doesn't feel right to you either. So this is a second takeaway from the study of the Alaskan mission, that Orthodox evangelism is really about it's about discovering who we are and becoming who we are, who we really are. Now, there is another takeaway that we might raise here. Let's go back to the settlement that was attempted in Florida, which disappeared almost without a trace within 10 years, actually even sooner than that. What's the big difference that you can see between that settlement in Florida and the missions in Alaska? The mission in Alaska encountered all kinds of difficulties, all kinds of roadblocks. If either of those two settlements were going to flounder and fail, it should have been the Alaskan mission. I mean, here you're in Florida. Granted, you got bugs and crocodiles, but you know you're in Florida. What difference do you? This is the difference that I see. I don't know how hard to push it. I'll just make it. But what do you see a difference? Yeah, Jason.
Because the person there, to harken back to your original statement, Dr. Turnbull did not bring forth a mission and did not respect, even though he had it on name.
No, you're on time. You're on target. Yes.
On Bram, New Smyrna, there wasn't really anything Orthodox or even Greek.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
Even though there were German towns and other stuff around that time.
What's that?
Even though there would later be German towns and people, your grandparents coming in with German.
Sure. Yes, Matthew.
Turnbull sounded like he was coming to Florida to start a plantation and then later bring Orthodoxy to the plantation.
Yeah.
I mean, the monks were just bringing Orthodoxy.
Yep, exactly. Turnbull had no ecclesial, he had no church directive. Did the church even know that he was going there? He didn't contact them and ask for their blessing. Whereas the Alaskan mission was directly sent by the church. So it had the blessing of the church. So you see that there's the difference. The one disappears, and I think that this is we might be thinking about this, as we continue to go through the history of Orthodoxy in America. All of the, it's like even the Orthodox people themselves are trying to destroy the church. But somehow Orthodoxy continues to thrive. In fact, no one is thriving in spite of our mess, geopolitical and ethnic and squabbles and whatnot. We're actually growing. We're actually growing. People are drawn to what's up there. Yes, Barb?
You couldn't be a part of the humility and the culture of the Alaskan natives
What do you mean?
that made it grow too, and was already seeded.
Already
The
seated?
humility
Okay.
and the culture of the Alaskan natives.
Well, yeah, I'm sure. But to that point, I would simply say that humility had nowhere to go with the American Protestant missionaries. In fact, maybe because of that humility, they could tell right away that this is not the right deal. But they could tell that the St Herman, St Innocent, and all of those guys, this is the real deal. Again, it's not just because of the doctrine and the teachings of the Orthodox Church, as beautiful as they are, as cohesive, coherent as it is. It was the personal witness of St Herman, St Innocent, St Jacob Netzvatov, so many of the people who made the teachings of the Church incarnate, without even speaking. And I dare say that many of you do the same thing, without even realizing it, just by being yourself, by being faithful, being honest, being kind, without selling the farm, In other words, being wise as serpents, even as you're innocent as a dove. Yeah. Just by being simple, decent folk, I don't know that we realize what kind of a witness, personal witness, we are making and how much of an impact we're having on people who are looking. Yes, Barb?
I think, when I was in Alaska, I think they had mentioned that St. Herman himself, he was always defending the Alaskan natives against those American fur traders.
Russian
He
fur
wrote to Alaska and complained.
Russian fur traders.
Right.
Yeah, they were
Russian fur traders.
Yes, well, you say they went to Russia, to Moscow to complain?
He had written letters.
Oh, yes, he did, and that's how Archimandrite Yosef perished, remember? He went to Moscow, to St. Petersburg, to complain, to lodge the complaint to the empress there, or whatever, so that they could take action, but he perished on a return journey. So he perished with two others. And so you had those three who perished. Then you had St. Juvenali and his companion who perished. Was it Peter the Alliot who was?
That's what I'm wondering, could his companion be St. Peter?
No, it wasn't St. Peter, because there's another one.
He came later.
No, there's another one who was tortured by the Catholics in California.
That was Juvenali.
Well, then we got a problem here, because my sources are saying that he was slain in the interior in 1796. But anyway, my point that I'm getting to is that within about 10 years or so, the original mission of 8 was down to just Herman and the deacon Naphtari and the priest Yosef.
Well, he was on his plaque and his icons, it says, "I am Orthodox Christian and I will not betray my faith."
Who's that?
Peter
Oh.
the Alliot.
Yeah, okay, that sounds like the one who was martyred in California.
Right.
Oh, his name wasn't Juvenali?
No, Juvenali is the one who was sent into the interior of Alaska and was slain by the natives there.
Oh, I thought Peter the Alliot's last name was Juvenali.
No, they're two different people.
Oh, okay, so that kills that, oh, never mind.
That kills that error.
It kills that joke too.
Oh, thank goodness.
That thing that happened with Herman, I was told that he was on Kodiak, but he moved to Spruce
Yes, he
Island
did, yes.
because he was,
He wanted to get away from Baranof.
right. And
Um,
I think he was even probably threatened.
Yes, he was afraid that he was going to be assassinated.
Right.
So for safety, he went farther away. But then, the natives came to him, and he taught the children there. He took care of the people there. He may have had some orphans with him. I don't remember the full story. Did he have an orphanage? And then there was a couple of holy people that came and assisted him. All of this is, shows that, as you can see, that there's a lot of history here, a lot of stories here that we're just skipping over. All right, well, the next part that I want to talk about is from Alaska into the mainland. From Alaska into the mainland. So in 1867, as we said, the territory of Alaska was sold to the United States. From 1867 then, basically let's say 1870, let's just collapse a lot of details. Let's say from 1870 to let's say 1890, in the late 1880s, while Orthodoxy in Alaska had taken firm root, in the mainland, on the mainland, Alaska, or Orthodoxy, was very sparse. Very sparse. Father Erickson's third chapter, in which he describes this period from 1870, let's say, to late to 1890, he calls it a church of immigrants. There were a few Orthodox churches that were established in the mainland, but maybe 5 or 6. Someplace in here, and I can't remember. As I said, history is not my strong suit. I can read the details, but then I can't absorb them, and I come away, and all I have are broad brush strokes. I cannot remember the colors that I just read. But there's a church in Chicago, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, New Orleans, maybe New York. So just 6 or 7 parishes established throughout the mainland. Meanwhile, you have the Orthodox Church, you have the North American or the Alaskan Mission going on in Alaska. At some point, the bishop, I believe it was John, Bishop John Metropolsky, who realized that in order to administer the affairs of Alaska even effectively, but also begin to minister to the needs that were beginning to emerge on the mainland, he moved the see, or the see was moved, the see of the bishop was moved from Sitka down to San Francisco. In this period, from the 1870 or so to 1880, the Orthodox presence in America seemed to be destined, I'm now quoting from Erickson, seemed to be destined to remain on the fringes of American life. But by the 1880s, the late 1880s, things changed because there's a growing tide of immigrants from Eastern Europe, from the Balkans, from the Middle East, and because of these waves of immigration, beginning in the late 1880s, Orthodoxy became one of the fastest growing faiths in America. In 1872 is when the Holy Synod in Russia approved the transfer of the see from Sitka, Alaska, down to San Francisco. And there's some things that we want to say. Just general comments that we want to say about Orthodoxy in America now in this period, the last half, let's say, of the 19th century. American society at this point was mostly rural. It was not urban. It was a rural society. And groups of immigrants coming to America, they came, like Turnbull, you might say. They did not come to missionize or to minister to the Orthodox there in America, as the missionaries had done in Alaska, because there were no Orthodox to minister to. They did not come with an ecclesial mandate, they did not come under episcopal direction. They came to America on their own initiative for purely economical reasons, and I'm willing to bet that your parents are one of them. They may not, how far back do you guys go to the old country? Well, what generation was the first generation to be born in America?
Would be my mom.
Yeah.
Your mom's
Your
generation.
dad,
Your
yes.
mom and dad's generation.
So
They were
it's
born in
only
America.
2 generations.
We're second
after
Okay.
that.
And they came from Slovakia,
Yeah.
Carpathian Russia,
Carpathian Mountains.
Carpathian Mountains. Yeah. Were they part of the Union? The St. Mary's?
Carpathian Rus.
But were they Orthodox or were they
Orthodox.
Yeah,
or they weren't Unions?
that's a good question.
Well, your grandparents may have been, your great grandparents may have been Unions. But by the time your mom and dad were born,
They were already
you were
Orthodox.
already Orthodox. So
1918.
but moreover, not only were they coming to America for economical reasons, but they were coming to America not in order to stay. Their intention, most of them, was not to stay. Their idea was to establish a living here in America because the jobs were plentiful, long enough to the return home as soon as possible. So in other words, they'd make their money. As one Romanian said, I come to America, make my thousands so I can go home. So they come, make their money, and they go back to the old country and live a good life. Now, keep in mind that let's try to understand the experience as best we can of these immigrants coming to America, these Orthodox immigrants coming from Orthodox countries coming to America. They come from Eastern countries whose culture is Byzantine, right? Centered on the church, the Orthodox Church. That's the culture, the religious culture that has shaped them. They come to America and they come into a culture that has been shaped by something completely different.
Yeah.
By the Latin Church, Protestantism and Catholicism. So the European immigrants that come to America at this time, and my grandparent, my great grandparents were with the wave of German immigrants in the late 19th century. So, but they're coming from Europe, they're coming from a Protestant Catholic culture to America, which is a Protestant Catholic culture. So they're coming to something that's still fairly familiar to them. Whereas you have these Eastern Orthodox immigrants, as I'm saying, they come to America in a completely different environment, culturally and religiously. So it's a different mindset, a different political mindset. So the mindset, you might say that this foreignness of American culture it only encouraged these immigrants to stay only as long as they had to in order to make their money, and then to go back home. We're talking about now the 1880s, 1890s. For them, you can understand that the Orthodox Church, with all of its trappings, was a taste, with all of its ethnic trappings, was a taste of home. So you can understand that when they come to America, they're in this completely strange territory. Or maybe it's like us going to Asia, I don't know. So what are they going to do? They're going to band together, and they're going to create brotherhoods, sisterhoods, or fellowships, and the activities of these what do you call them?
Enclaves.
Organizations. What would you say?
Enclave.
Okay, enclaves or ghettos is where they would come together. They'd live in a ghetto, and in the ghetto they'd have their organizations, in which they'd be able to celebrate their ethnic their ethnic culture back home. But sooner or later, and sooner than later, they would want to set up a church, because the church is the center of the culture back home. And so in the church, they're able to get a taste of home. But here you see that the church, the purpose of the church, isn't to evangelize or to minister to the Americans. Actually, the purpose of the church is to protect them from America. And so they insulate themselves in the church. They have no desire to assimilate into America or to let America in, for two reasons. As I just said, number one, they're interested in getting as much income as they can so they can go back home and enjoy the good life. But secondly, the American culture would be a threat. The Protestant Catholic way of thinking and it's so different from the Orthodox way of living and of understanding that it would be a threat, and Orthodoxy would be in danger of being completely absorbed and assimilated into an American culture and lost altogether. So it encouraged these parishes to band together, to circle the wagons, if you will, and as Blake was suggesting, in these ghettos, build a parish church that could protect them from America and give them a taste of home in the parish church. Now, what did it say? I was reading someplace that there's a beautiful quote. Now I can't remember it. Something about it was through religion, their Orthodox religion, that they were able to, or that they practiced their ethnic culture. And they practiced their ethnic culture through Orthodox religion, or something like that. The two go together. I mean, I have a quote here. Let's see. You can't be Greek. One of these guys says, you can't be, as one immigrant put it, there could not be any Greek life, or Serbian life, or Russian life, or Romanian life without the church. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think we're seeing in America now what happens when the country becomes irreligious. But in this time, you can see how the church and the ethnic background are so entwined that to be a Greek is to be Greek Orthodox. To be Greek Orthodox is to be Greek. And so the idea that, and in fact these ethnic parishes could not understand why anyone who was not of that particular ethnic background would want to come and be with it. Why would an American want to come and be Romanian with us? You're not Romanian. You get away. You have your own culture. Don't mess up ours. So we can be Romanian. But in this setting, all of these immigrants coming, well, you have, and they're congregating in the various centers of the United States. But you have the North American mission of Russia, and so the diocese of this Alaskan mission, this North American mission, is the whole of North America. You have the bishop in San Francisco. How is he going to minister to all of these immigrants who are coming and beginning to form their own parish, beginning to congregate, in New Orleans, in New York, in Chicago, in Florida, wherever it might be? It's like, you need more resources in order to minister to them. And so what happened is that these ethnic groups would come together, these immigrants would band together, and when it came time to build a church, then they would petition somebody for a priest, because you can't, as Orthodox, you can't just have appoint your own priest. And so they would petition somewhere to have a priest, and they could go anywhere. They might go to the mother country. They might go to this Orthodox group over here, this bishop over here. Some of them would go to the bishop in San Francisco, the Russian Orthodox bishop in San Francisco. So you have this kind of free-for-all among the Orthodox going on in America, side by side with the Russian Orthodox mission and the Archbishop in San Francisco trying to minister to his own parishes there in America, and also trying to reach out and minister to these other ethnic groups as best he can, if they'll receive him. So, for example, somebody was talking about the Greeks. Well, the Greeks are a different story altogether. I mean, and I'm not going to have time to talk about them much. I'm not going to have time to talk about them at all. But, for example, Bishop Tikhon, who came to America as the Archbishop of the American mission. What was it? 1889 was it? He as the bishop of the Russian Orthodox Church, which was the first to establish a presence in the United States. So that meant canonically that all of Orthodox should be under the bishop of the American mission, under the Russian Orthodox Church. That's one reason that the Greeks are a different story. They're not going to come under a Russian bishop. But all the Orthodox are supposed to be under this Russian bishop. So he comes to Chicago, to a Greek city, to a Greek church in the city of Chicago, and he's the bishop. He's the presiding bishop of the continent, of this diocese. He volunteers to serve a liturgy there. They welcome him with open arms. He serves the liturgies there. He serves it actually in Greek. It's a wonderful experience that he's traveling on to New York because he's making this journey to visit his diocese, to go through his diocese and find out what's happening. So he comes to New York, but the Greek parish there finds out he's there, and they're afraid that if they let him in, that the Russians will try to take over. So they lock the doors. They won't let him in. This is a story to illustrate the kind of the chaotic situation in the United States as a result of the mass immigration and all of these ethnic groups wanting to go to their own bishop or to another parish. In other words, there's no sense of episcopal order. And in this regard, and we'll close with this point. In this regard, the Orthodox look just like Protestants. You have all of these ethnic groups side by side with the legitimate, if you will, canonical Orthodox Church in America, the Russian Orthodox Greek Catholic Church, as they call themselves. Its Archbishop there in San Francisco until it was moved to New York. You have all of but side by side with that, you have the Serbians over here. They kind of, some of them are with the Russian mission, but some of them have banded and formed their own parish. You have the Albanians over here. Some of them are with the Russian mission, but some of them are all together themselves. The Ukrainians, most of them kind of went to the old country. They didn't form their own parish. But can you see the picture? You have all of these ethnic Orthodox parishes. They're not really in conversation with one another. And since it's the ethnicity that's at the forefront and not the Orthodox faith, I don't know, the Romanians don't necessarily talk to the Serbians. They might talk to other Romanians, but they don't necessarily talk to the Serbians. The Serbians don't necessarily talk to the Romanians. So you have all of these ethnic groups. They're just like Protestants. And if they want to get a priest, well, they petition somebody, a bishop or something, who sends them a priest. But in their mind, the priest is their employee. He's not the employee of the bishop sent to minister to them. He's their employee, and they can hire him or fire him as they wish. So do you get the picture? It looks like Protestantism. There's one difference, however, one big difference. Can you see it? This is the point that I want to end with. What's the one big difference that you can see? Okay, the same faith.
Yeah.
That's the irony. It's the irony. But it's also the fact that exposes the, some would even say heretical structure of Orthodoxy in America. It's not heretical, what's that?
All the jurisdictions.
All the different jurisdictions. It's not heretical in the sense that they teach heresy. It's heretical in that the structure of the Orthodox churches and jurisdictions in America do not reflect the theology that they all hold in common. They serve the same sacraments. They had the same doctrine. They teach the same faith. But they're divided In fact, it was the Greeks, in my opinion, ironically, the Greek Patriarchate, in, I don't remember the year 1860 something maybe, who defined this situation as a heresy. He called it philetism or tribalism. It's a heresy. So this is we're not yet to 1920, the Bolshevik Revolution. That's when this situation that we're seeing and the struggle that the Russian mission was making in order to bring unity amongst all of these ethnic groups, that's when it just exploded. And depending on how you look at it, it's either a lesson in despair or a lesson in the power of the Holy Spirit. We can look at that more in detail next time, at the next class. But that's what, so as you can see, this has been a very helter-skelter sketch. A lot we have not covered. That's why I gave you these 4 sources so that you can pursue it on your own if you'd like. It's a fascinating story. It can be an inspiring story. That's the point that I want to end on. That the quest for Orthodox unity, it was making progress until 1920, 1917, 1920, when it was like the devil threw a grenade into the room and just shattered the church into pieces. But look at where we are. Look at St. Herman's.
How does Ecclesiastes actually get triggered then?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. Well, we'll hope to talk about that next time.
Which will be when?
Next Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this class and the next class. The next class will be the last class before Christmas. So my goal today was to get to 1920, which I've done by skipping over a whole lot of history. Our goal next time will get from 1920 to the present.
Today is, that'll be the 14th.
Correct.
I had a question, maybe I'll hold this for next week, it's about the contemporary thing.
Well, you want to ask me and I'll be thinking about it?
Yeah, and this is about contemporary issues, all this gender ideology, and people are saying, well, people have gender dysphoria, who have struggled with homelessness. Well, if you don't affirm them the way they are, they'll kill themselves and you'll be responsible for their death. How do you answer that?
Okay.
No, seriously, it's a serious question.
It is.
And I know that someone's deeply committed to that, you're not going to change them, but I still want to have an answer.
Well, as I said, I'll think about it. Give me a chance to think about it. Maybe you can listen to Father Josiah Trinum. He has a lecture on transgenderism. In Patristic Nectar. Go to Patristic Nectar and look up transgender. There's a very nice lecture on that. All right, guys. Let's say a prayer and then we'll be done. Truly it is me to bless you, Lord God, so the blessed and most pure and the mother of our God. For honorable and the cherubim of ours beyond comparison, the seraphim. For our corruption that gave his birth to God, the word truth, our hope, we magnify thee. Christ is in our midst.